For to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me today. Before I begin, I'd like to thank Vice President Harris, Treasury Secretary Yellen, and Senator Warner and Mrs. Menchov for their unwavering support and efforts to strengthen our minority depository institutions, that is our MDIs, and community development financial institutions, the CDFIs. These diverse and mission-driven institutions have been instrumental in ensuring that critical aid reaches small businesses, vulnerable communities, and those in dire need during the pandemic. Over the past year, Senator Warner and I have teamed up to pass historical legislation directing the federal government to make capital investments, grants, deposits in our nation's MDIs and CDFIs, because communities of color have been among the hardest hit by the pandemic. I worked with Senator Warner to include key provisions of my bill, the Promoting and Advancing Communities of Color through Inclusive Lending Act, in last December's COVID-19 stimulus package. I'm pleased that this issue is not only bicameral, but also bipartisan, as I was also able to work with Senators Crapo and Brown, Representatives Meeks, and my committee's ranking member, Mr. McHenry, to secure an unprecedented $12 billion in capital investments and grants to strengthen MDIs and CDFIs. Supporting our nation's CDFIs and MDIs has long been a priority for me. Over 40 years ago, I began working with CDFIs in my home state of California and was a founding director of the CDFI Pacific Coast Regional Corporation. The lessons I learned back then are just as relevant today. CDFIs are critical lenders for our communities of color and infusions of capital like the one beginning announced today. I am so proud that this is a game-changing operation. So I'm pleased to be here today for the initial release of $1.25 billion in CDFI and MDI, and applaud the Biden-Harris administration for keeping their promises of an equitable recovery to vulnerable communities. So under my leadership, my committee will continue to look at these issues. CDFIs are high on our agenda, and we're continuing to strengthen them and make them more accessible to our communities. While this is a historic investment, our work does not end here. According to one news report, between 66 and 79% of minority business owners said that their firm's financial conditions were fair or poor during the pandemic, whereas only 54% of white business owners endorsed their firms being in one of these conditions. I see this investment as a down payment on what we need to restore our MDIs and to support our CDFIs. Earlier this month, we commemorated the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre that destroyed Black-owned businesses and killed hundreds of Black men, women, and children. So as we approach the commemoration of the end of slavery in America on Juneteenth, we must acknowledge that we carry the responsibility on our shoulders to make sure that progress is made, that Black and Latinx small businesses remain open and not boarded up, that pandemic relief reaches every family and every community, and that our recovery is equitable across the country. So I thank you once again for inviting me, and I look forward to continuing our work on behalf of CDFIs and MDIs. Now, I would like to introduce someone who has been a long-time advocate for CDFIs and MDIs, and someone I have worked closely on with this issue, with my colleague, Senator Mark Warner.